Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, Marvel jumpstarts a new film franchise with Guardians of the Galaxy. The life of James Brown is tackled in Get On Up, and Michael Douglas and Diane Keaton are sparring neighbors in And So It Goes. Our home media moment is a coming-of-age story called A Birder's Guide to Everything. Inspired by And So It Goes, our top five this week will look at films starring the older generation. And our triple feature of older films is new classic Sleepwalk With Me, my pick for old classic The Birdcage, and the Oscar A to Z classic musical An American in Paris. First, we're going to start with Guardians of the Galaxy, a huge weekend, $94 million, shattering the August debut record by $25 million, and one of the biggest openings of the year. Joe's going to tell us about Guardians.
Guardians of the Galaxy is the newest Marvel Studios film and an adaptation to the recent comic book storyline of the same title. It stars Chris Pratt as Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, Zoe Saldana as Gamora, Dave Bautista as Drax the Destroyer, and featuring the voice talents of Vin Diesel as Groot and Bradley Cooper as Rocket the Raccoon. Directed by James Gunn. Due to a variety of circumstances, petty thief Peter Quill is arrested after stealing a priceless artifact that turns out to be more important than he first realizes. Afterwards, Quill and his newfound fellow misfits at first agree to join up and escape prison for their own needs. However, when a Kree fanatic named Ronan attempts to get a hold on the device, the lives of billions are at stake. This, and due to Quill's leadership, persuades the ragtag group to become the galaxy's last hope. This movie is, quite simply put, amazing. It is easily one of the best installments Marvel has ever produced. Considering it's based on characters most viewers don't know about, and even many comic book fans, that's very impressive. The film was colorful and vibrant in its effects. The designs for the creatures are reminiscent of classic science fiction, and does give a good intro to the greater Marvel Universe, in effect creating a fun space opera of sorts. The characters are well established within a short period of time, and they all have well-developed arcs. No character outshines the other, being rather balanced, with each actor being perfectly cast and bringing true heart to their roles. The comedy is also fun, being mostly situational and relying on the chemistry of the actors and precise editing. This movie knows what it is. It is silly, lighthearted, and bordering on parody at points. However, this doesn't take away from the dramatic components which do serve to give real stakes and make us care for these characters. As an adaptation to the comics, it does make some alterations, but the Kree being finally established is a great step forward. I will admit exposition is dumped out quickly at points for the uninitiated, which makes it seem a bit fast-paced, but this isn't really a hindrance. It's a very well executed film, and quite possibly my favorite film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I give it my first A+ for the year.
Wow, Joe, great job. It's hard to get an A+ in 2014, as we've seen.
Ain't that the truth?
So, I definitely have to hand it to Disney's marketing team. They took a group of comic book no-names and created this fervor for a film about them on the level of a Thor or a Spider-Man, as the $94 million opening weekend would suggest. And the good news is, it delivers, as Joe mentioned. One thing that is great about this film is that even though we don't know these characters from Adam, the film wastes almost no time on origin stories and gets right to the story at hand, and enjoyably, the action. The classic rock soundtrack is great, another touchstone hit home with the trailers, and Pratt seems right at home as a bumbling action hero. Some of the punchlines are a bit forced, and I wish that they were eased off a bit during the more dramatic moments, but I was certainly laughing out loud more than any other superhero movie I've ever seen, so a lot of it definitely worked, especially from Rocket. And as an aside, as you mentioned, Bradley Cooper, the voice of Rocket, he really seems to be on this like Tom Hanks early career type trajectory. He stars in Oscar-nominated films alongside these dopey comedies like The Hangover, and now, big budget action movies as well, which he was doing before with the A-Team too.
He's got just great talent. I mean,
he really does.
The guy has so much range. You can put him in anything, it just seems to work.
And it doesn't sound like Bradley Cooper. Like, the character, in only maybe a few spots, would you know it was Bradley Cooper.
Honestly,
if you didn't already know.
If they hadn't said that, I don't think I would have picked up on it.
Yeah. Him or Vin Diesel.
No,
Vin Diesel only says a few words,
but
but
it's a good point you say that, though, because Vin Diesel has a few lines, but I actually read up on it. He actually did find out what the character was actually saying, and did try to enunciate it every time he said that same line.
Interesting.
So you couldn't even tell if, once again, if I didn't know Vin Diesel, I probably wouldn't have picked up on that either.
Well, and you know what else about Vin Diesel, as another quick aside here, he was so into making this movie and doing the character properly you know how they do international releases where people dub in the voices. Since he has so few lines, he actually did the lines in 6 different languages. So a lot of other countries will hear Groot just the same as we do.
That's awesome.
Which I think is cool. But in all, Guardians is not the best superhero movie of 2014. I'd still give that to X-Men, but it's easily the most fun. And I leave it with an A-. I definitely want to watch it again because I think that could probably be bumped up to an A, depending on how it holds up. Justin?
After a rough 3 years watching the films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Phase 2, I came to the conclusion that if the franchise was ever going to get back on track with the first phase, it would desperately need a change of pace. While the established heroes thus far are already set in their ways, the only way of achieving that would have to be from Guardians of the Galaxy, which I can only describe to newcomers as the Avengers with a bad attitude, but a lot of fun. While I'm not quite certain all audiences will be able to appreciate the level of snarkiness, this critic was repeatedly in stitches with the banter between the 4 anti-heroes who are reluctantly trying to get along given the circumstances. Admittedly, the best moments I personally thought went to Cooper and Diesel as Rocket and Groot, but that's not to say that the others weren't able to hold their own as well. Bautista is surprisingly entertaining as Drax, and the look of the film never gets old. It's a bold move on Marvel's part, but if this is the start of a new line of characters to the series, I can't wait to see them again. And much like Dan, I also give this one an A-.
What do you guys think it was about either the marketing or just the idea of the movie itself that drove people into the theaters like gangbusters on really, as you said, Joe, I mean, a franchise that even comic book fans are not all that familiar with?
Well, I think part 1 to this is simply a matter of brand association. Yes, Guardians of the Galaxy is not very familiar with most people, but I think because it's still attached to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and therefore it's going to tie into later storylines that will involve characters that will be familiar and probably a crossover at some point. Obviously, people are going to want to see where it's heading next. The second thing is just, I think, a matter of like positive reception / word of mouth.
Yeah, that's true. It has great reviews, and the word of mouth from like Comic-Cons and such is stellar. So that's a good point.
And if I had to make a third argument, I would say simply the shock factor. I think when the trailer started getting released, the one thought that crossed everyone's mind is, they have a fighting raccoon. What's up with this?
Okay.
He pretty much covered everything.
Is that what you were thinking as well?
Basically, it's a combination of, as you said, brand association. I mean, they trust Marvel Studios because they've made, even their worst films have been good, I would say, by most people's standards.
That is true.
You know, I mean, people generally love them, so even if they weren't completely sure about these characters, they have faith in them. Plus, also, like you said, shock factor. It's curious. It seems silly and goofy, and that's so different than everything else, so it got everybody even more intrigued. Plus, the comic book series has been getting more popular, and this has kind of helped to boost that with the propelling of the advertising. And I've been seeing a lot of promotion for it. And it's clever because they gave you just enough to pique your interest, but not too much to reveal anything. There was a much different movie than I think anybody was expecting in a lot of ways.
I would agree with that.
You know, there was a lot more going into it, and it really is also something you have to see. The last movie before, the second Avengers movie, and as we see, it does tie in pretty significantly to the storyline.
Right.
So, there you go.
Actually, I had a question about that. Phase 2 is obviously going to culminate with the Avengers Age of Ultron, which is still largely an Earth-based story. Guardians of the Galaxy is sort of like deep space in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I kept thinking while watching it, wouldn't it have been more appropriate to save Guardians for Phase 3?
Well, the one issue that I kind of have, that kind of worries me a little bit about Phase 2, is that most of Phase 2 seems to be planning out Avengers 3, not Avengers 2. Avengers 2 is going to be based around the creation of Ultron and Tony Stark's issues, whatever's going on with him, which makes it seem like it's more of a temporary stepping stone. Not necessarily a bad story, but really it seems like literally everything up to this point seems to be leading up more towards Avengers 3, including Guardians of the Galaxy. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing they're continuing it. I'm just kind of concerned about what Avengers 2 is going to lead. Is it just going to feel like, honestly, like a Thor 2?
We need like a generic bad guy for them to fight until we get to the real big guy.
I mean, it could definitely like maybe ample the character development for them, possibly. But it seems like everybody's really getting amped up for the ultimate final conclusion, which will be the end of Phase 3, Avengers 3. But it does kind of make you wonder, are we going to go back to Avengers 2 and is it going to be completely different from everything else? Because it seems like it is.
Right.
So, I don't know. I don't really mind the fact they went this route because it definitely opens up more questions because we only have seen snippets of the aliens in the other dimensions. And now that we actually have the Kree and the Nova Empire, I mean, this is stuff that just shows, hey, it's going to get people interested. And I think it's cool because in this film, they actually stayed true to a lot of these characters and the points in these worlds, but they only gave you snippets just enough to get people interested, and this will get people to buy comics and look things up.
Oh, yeah.
Because, there's a whole world, and wow, there's a lot more than just the stuff on Earth, which some people might not know.
And they've rebooted this Guardian series several times, Marvel, in the comic book world.
Yes, actually, the characters we've seen are the most recent versions. It's just really bold because it's literally, we're not even talking about a B-level storyline. This is really obscure.
Right.
It's kind of deeply etched in Marvel's history.
But obviously, the guys at Marvel kept coming back to these characters over and over, even though the comic book lines don't do that well.
Because
so
it's
there
fun.
Must be something they knew. There must be something about them.
It's like within Marvel, they're kind of out of cult status. Because they're kind of seen as the Deadpool almost. Mm-hmm. They're kind of silly. They embrace a different perspective. They're not always as serious, and that's why people go back to them. My only real concern that could have been a negative was honestly the whole fact that they don't really give you that much. But I really don't think it bogs the movie down that much because you guys might not know as much about comics, but you didn't feel too lost about what was going on.
I didn't feel lost at all.
Yeah, you knew basically what was going on, so it was no big deal.
I mean, there were a few details I would have liked to see more about. Some of the things I could make a few stray inferences on, but I wouldn't have minded a little more exposition. But I don't consider that a legitimate nitpick.
So did you want a little bit more of an origin story?
I was actually really satisfied with the general handling of it. Okay. It was just some side details.
Right.
Well, I think in terms of Quill, we got enough.
I do too. I mean, they gave us maybe 5 minutes at the beginning.
And he's the main focus, which is fine. We've established him. And like I said, everybody has a good arc. We know enough about them to see who they are. And I think that's actually arguably more impressive than doing a whole movie about each of these characters bringing together like Avengers, which is one reason why it kind of impresses me more than Avengers does. Because Avengers has all these other movies to go off of, some of them with previous movies, multiple for certain characters like Iron Man, to have already gone established. This is one that's practically on blind faith.
Right.
And I would argue these characters are just as compelling.
I agree.
So, I mean, that's just impressive.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, Samuel L. Jackson, if you guys don't know, is the highest-grossing actor ever between the Avengers movies or the Marvel movies and Star Wars and Jurassic Park. Zoe Saldana now is a part of 3 epic franchises. Avatar, which she signed on for all of the upcoming ones, and then now she's part of the Marvel Universe and Star Trek. So I think that's pretty awesome for her.
She's getting up there.
She did a great job in the movie.
I loved her in this.
Yeah.
She's really impressing me more and more. She's establishing herself.
And I love her as Uhura, too.
She's good. You know, she has range, and she's establishing herself as an action heroine, and she's really good. She's going places.
All right, well, up next, it is Get On Up. This is a James Brown biopic starring Chadwick Boseman of 42 fame, and mostly goes between Brown's life as a young, poor Georgia child and his rise to fame in the 60s and 70s, with a little time devoted to the years between those mentioned and his later years. Nelson Ellis of True Blood fame plays Brown's best friend and decades-long band member Bobby Byrd, and Dan Aykroyd and Viola Davis have supporting roles as Brown's representation and mother, of course, respectively. There's no denying that James Brown truly will always be the godfather of soul, and his music will span the generations. That will be obvious to anybody over the age of, say, 15, unlike the subject of Jersey Boys from last month, the Four Seasons, for example, who many people of a younger generation probably learned about from the ground up in that film. To that point, I think it's harder to make a convincing movie about a star whose career most people will already know about going into. Boseman plays the role exceptionally well, and his singing and dancing are largely spot on. The trouble stems from the directing of the film by Tate Taylor, who also helmed Best Picture nominees The Help and Winter's Bone. We veer very erratically from one phase of Brown's life to the next and back again, sometimes with no context at all, which can be very distracting. Also, as the focus is put so much on the making of Brown's career, we don't get enough insight into the man he was. We see a lot of the good, but most of the negative we get on him in Get On Up is surface stuff. With a too long runtime, it might have been nice to take some of those extra minutes and devote it to a few of those things. Overall, it actually turns out a lot like Jersey Boys. It's watchable, but hardly as well done or memorable as many of the music biopics that have come before. It gets a C+ from me. Justin?
A biopic story is only as good as its storyteller, and that's at the heart of the problems of Get On Up. While I applaud director Tate Taylor for trying to tell the story of James Brown in a non-linear fashion similar to Cloud Atlas, there's minimal rhyme or reason to it, and often this comes off as awkward and confusing, particularly with the irritating tendency to break the fourth wall in between segments. It doesn't help that Taylor struggles with how to portray Brown, as either a man who just got caught up in his own time in the spotlight, or a flat-out narcissistic jerk, which ends up largely being the latter. However, where the film truly shines is with Boseman as the Godfather Soul himself. Although his impersonation of Brown's signature rasp is absolutely dead on, it also does make some of his lines seem mumbled and as such difficult to hear. Though watching him bring Brown's legacy to life leaves an impression of how much devotion Boseman truly brings to every role he decides to take on. Unfortunately, the rest of the cast is criminally underused, or in one case, just abruptly taken out with no emotional impact whatsoever, which makes much of the backstory in an already overlong movie feel unnecessary. Get On Up desperately wants to be the next great music biopic with an epic scale storyline, impressive sets and costumes, and sometimes clever, other times pretentious metaphors, but just can't live up to its own expectations, and I give it a C+.
Joe, what'd you think of Get On Up?
I don't know. I think I enjoyed this one more than you guys. I will admit that it was very uneven in terms of the storytelling. Like, it was very sporadic for, I say, about the first half of the film. We kept jumping from point to point in his life with no rhyme or reason. But then at a certain point, it just starts going in chronological order, which is fine. But you kind of wonder why they didn't do it in the first place.
Yeah.
I thought some of the stylistic elements of the film were really cool. I liked some of the transitions. I liked some of the stuff that occurred during his childhood, kind of envisioning the music in his head as it kind of shifted. I thought that was really interesting. I thought that the performance was excellent. I think he really did embody Brown completely. The rasp also, as just to point out, did kind of make some of the dialogue a little difficult to understand. Overall, though, my biggest problem with the movie is that even though there was a lot of good music utilized, and we did see, I think, a lot to understand the man, there was a huge chunk of the life that's missing.
Yeah.
We kind of get to the point where he loses his friends, and then we see him redeemed. And there's like almost a 20-year gap there.
Yeah.
Which I feel like would have been the most interesting part of the movie. And if it wasn't for that, I think this could have definitely been a stronger film. Honestly, I don't know. It's kind of something that was enjoyable to watch, but it was very, very uneven. And I give it a B-.
Okay. I teetered on that, but like the last 30 years or so of his life is summed up in the last
15 minutes?
I was going to say like 10, and the first scene. That's it. I guess, a lot of his, more legal troubles were in that end period of his life, and some of the substance abuse problems, and not that we haven't seen that kind of stuff before in movies like this with Ray and stuff, but, it doesn't mean it didn't happen to this dude.
Yeah.
They could have presented it, a little bit more. One thing that I thought was a little bit distracting, Boseman obviously sounded the part, danced the part, but until his later years, he didn't exactly look the part. And there were a few scenes where there would be posters for like a James Brown show or a James Brown album cover, and it was the real deal cover with the actual James Brown. And I didn't know how to feel about that, because I thought it maybe should have been a picture of Boseman as James Brown on the poster.
That's a stylistic choice.
It is.
I don't know.
I don't know that it worked for me personally.
It's actually kind of interesting that you keep mentioning that you thought he sounded the part. He didn't actually perform the songs.
That's actually one thing that really bugged me about the movie was the dubbing.
Because he danced. It was him dancing.
Yeah. The dancing was great. The dancing was amazing, but the dubbing really annoyed me. Because they didn't even have an attempt to have these people sing, or at least lip sync better. Like, there were just
his
random
lip
moments.
syncing was not great.
Not just him,
that.
but even when there were other people singing, like when he meets Mr. Bird and they're having that exchange,
right?
And they start singing. It is so clearly just dubbed over, and like the timing was really off.
Well, the one scene was deliberately so because they were on that movie set with Frankie Avalon at the white person party.
No, that was fine.
Okay.
That I understood that.
Because that one,
no, but
at first really stuck out to me, and then I learned, okay, they're just their lip syncing on purpose for
But
the
there
movie.
literally were other scenes where it was off.
Yeah.
Like, noticeably off. And it
Yeah.
was really obviously, like, dubbed over. And I just thought they could have done a better job trying to make that seem a little more realistic. Because it takes you out of the movie.
Right.
It's like, wow, this is just some bad dubbing. You know, it was kind of like Jersey Boys, but I thought it was more noticeable here. I don't know.
No, that's an interesting point. I didn't realize he didn't sing himself. Because I looked up the dancing, because I wasn't sure if he was doing all those splits and everything himself, which he was.
It's pretty cool.
But I didn't actually look up the singing, so I didn't know that.
But I have to ask, as a music aficionado that you are, do you think it really factors into how authentic a performance is in a music biopic?
My issue was with the dubbing. I don't, whether or not he sings or not, I
Right.
think if he acts well, that's all that matters. But the dubbing was just off for me. I don't know, but maybe it's because the levels were off. Like, it was louder than it seemed the performance should have been. Like, realistically, they were singing, and it didn't sound like they were actually singing. Like
Well,
at level.
yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, really, in an answer to your question, Justin, I don't think it necessarily hurts as long as, right, they can act like they're sounding the part, as Joe just mentioned. And
Like, if they can't sing, you can't blame an actor for not.
yeah, I
being
mean,
able to sing.
not every actor is going to be a great singer.
No.
I appreciate that he rehearsed the dancing for 6 hours a day, to
Yeah.
prepare for the concert scenes. That was fine. I mean, I'll be honest, and this is by far a guilty pleasure, as we all know, but in the movie Burlesque, obviously Christina Aguilera and Cher are both singing their own parts.
Right.
Christina Aguilera's lip syncing, for some reason, is really bad. And you'd think she's done a decade of music videos, you'd think she'd be a little bit more adept at that. But I thought that was a little bit like, okay, obviously you're not really singing, but obviously it's her because it's Christina Aguilera.
At the very least, she'd be able to lip sync.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I can definitely see how that would be a problem, and I'm glad you brought that up, Joe, because that was a little bit irritating in a few
The
spots.
thing is, I really wanted to like the movie. Like, I felt like there was definitely making of, like, this epic bio story.
Yeah.
But it just felt like everything we got was surface. It was almost like Cliff Notes. And it really was. I just
Yeah.
felt like we didn't really get to know the man. The only thing that was strong about it was really the performance.
Yeah. I agree. I really, really wish we got more with him. And Justin mentioned a lot of the supporting players are, underutilized. I don't know if necessarily a lot of them are underutilized, but there's a couple that I think could have gotten a little bit more fleshed out.
I thought
I wanted
Aykroyd,
a lot more Octavia Spencer.
Yeah, that was actually the main one I was thinking of. She's only in maybe 3 scenes.
And her character's awesome.
Yeah, her character's really good. She sort of becomes his de facto mother in his teenage years. And yeah, well, like I said, at the beginning of my review, it covers like his young childhood and then his rise to fame like 10 years later. It skips his teenage years almost entirely, which I think is a shame. All right, well, up next we're going to do And So It Goes, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Realtor and curmudgeon Orrin Little, played by Michael Douglas, takes pleasure in making the lives of his neighbors miserable when his estranged son arrives with news that he's going to prison and needs him to look after his daughter. Completely confused about how to take care of his granddaughter, Orrin seeks out help from his neighbor, a lounge singer named Leah, played by Diane Keaton, and slowly starts to discover some of the reasons why Orrin's so irritable. There's a series of questions I found myself asking while writing this review that all began with the same 2 words. What happened? What happened to Michael Douglas's biting wit and witty charisma that never seemed to get old? What happened to Diane Keaton's ability to be the best part of a romantic comedy? And, arguably most importantly, what happened to director Rob Reiner, who used to put together fantastic, unforgettable films like Misery, The Princess Bride, and my personal favorite film of all time, Stand By Me? The answer, painfully, to all these questions is I have no idea. When the movie isn't relentlessly clubbing audiences over the head with the idea that Keaton can sing, the wildly flimsy story wanders around aimlessly as just about every fluffy and predictable plot device can be used, from the supposedly funny antics between Douglas and his granddaughter to the unbelievably forced relationship with Keaton. It offers nothing to the imagination and more often than not just comes across as boring. Though for as much issue I take with these, I have to confess that there were a few scenes that, had they expanded upon them, would have led to at least a half-decent film, and come the end there are a few mildly amusing moments to be had. That said, And So It Goes is a lazy summer comedy likely only to appeal to audiences the same age as Douglas and Keaton, and as such I give it my grade that fits that bill perfectly. D+.
Reiner probably makes it a little more personal for you, Justin. A little bit. You've got some high expectations for the man, and I can understand
Not
that.
as much as you might think.
Well, every movie you mentioned is
a classic.
at least 25 years old. The guy hasn't made a good movie in a long time.
He really hasn't? I pretty much would echo Justin for the most part. I think that the story just didn't focus here. I mean, there were so many elements we had to cover. We had the romantic angle. We had him being, having this relationship with his granddaughter to redeem him. We've got the neighbors. We've got his career. We've got all these side characters. There's just not enough focus in this movie. And I feel like there's just kind of a lack of feeling from everyone. Like, none of these actors were really trying their best. Like, these guys are capable of doing so much more. And I found Keaton's character to be a little annoying. Like, she was just really overdramatic, and I just felt like it was unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
For a character that is supposed to have all this wisdom, she just seemed kind of immature, actually. Douglas was okay. I mean, he was passable. He did have a few good scenes. I liked some of the story elements here. The basic story in and of itself is not bad, but it's just been done to death, and everything is so underdeveloped here and unfocused that I kind of feel that it really shouldn't have gone as a comedy. The best films were the more dramatic elements. Really, once again, I've been picking this up lately. This film didn't really know what it wanted to be. It's advertised as a comedy, but most of it's not really that funny, and it's just kind of hollow. And mostly boring because everything's extremely predictable. But the saving grace for it was actually the kid. I really enjoyed the character, and every scene she was in interacting with Douglas really was uplifting for me to some extent. I thought there was definitely a lot of potential here, but I still have to echo Justin's grade with a D+. Didn't like this one too much.
Yeah. I think it's no secret that senior citizens are routinely the most underserved population in mainstream cinema. Unfortunately, a lot of what's not awards bait, aimed at also broad audiences like August Osage County or Saving Mr. Banks,
Nebraska.
falls in, or Nebraska, good example, falls into this romantic comedy category. And I would say rom-coms aimed specifically at the AARP demo are some of the worst. There's some occasional gems there, as we'll probably hear about with our top 5 later in the show, but And So It Goes is just the bottom of the barrel. Not only is it utterly predictable and safe, but it's not funny. Many of the relationships between the characters aren't even really that clear. Douglas's character arc is absolutely ridiculous, as is Keaton's. Both performances aren't all that good. It's a film with little more to offer than one, maybe 2 mildly amusing lines, and a decent relationship between Keaton's character and Douglas's granddaughter, Sarah. I thought those were some of the best scenes.
Yeah.
I agree that the girl playing Sarah was probably the best part of the movie.
She was good.
But that is not nearly enough to in any way recommend this film. Keaton and Douglas deserve better, and in fact, the entirety of the older film-going population does, and it gets an F from me.
Dang.
Whoa.
It was a bad movie.
Yeah.
I am shocked that it even
exists.
Like, Michael Douglas is so terrible in this movie. He's not funny. His character stinks.
I think they're going through the motions. I
They
was going to
really
say,
are.
They don't really have much to work
everybody
with.
on this one just seems to be going through the motions.
Like they're just there. I was actually thinking at the end of the film, the granddaughter makes the short film, and it's better than the whole movie.
That's
Ironically
true.
enough.
No, I mean, like, and the storyline involved with it is not bad.
Right,
It's cool. I mean, like, if they just focused on that in of itself, or any of their storylines, like, his son ends up in prison, and it's really, like, it seems interesting, convoluted,
Right.
because I'm like, that shouldn't happen.
No.
Like, that kind of misstep legally just doesn't happen.
Right.
But anyway,
But all right.
let's look into that. I like that. It's interesting. That's a part of the movie we could focus on.
Right.
It's resolved in, like, 2 scenes.
Right.
Oh, why'd your dad do this? Because he actually loves you. We have virtually no reason for him to change.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's one problem, too. We're supposed to establish Douglas as being this horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
He's unlikable, but he must not be that bad. Because it takes, like, 2 or 3 instances to get him to pretty much change everything.
basically.
He's like, it's not like a dramatic.
He's all
like,
of a sudden nice to the neighbors.
as good as it gets, it's like in comparison, like that was a gradual thing.
Right.
Like it's painful. Like every interaction with a different character gets Nicholson's character to become a better person.
Right.
And it takes pretty much the whole movie to get to that final point. This one, it's like literally, he just seems like he's not as terrible as you'd have him be.
Right.
He just seemed honestly, he didn't seem that horrible. Maybe that was the problem. Like I know he's supposed to be a terrible person, but maybe it was the delivery. He just pretty much turned on a dime pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
It's like, oh, you know,
I have a granddaughter. I need to be nice now.
I'm gonna get rid of her. I see the mom's in the situation. She's like the drug addict. Oh, I
Yeah.
guess I'm gonna be a great grandpa now. Like
It's a horribly written character.
you must have been
Yeah.
like really This must have been a facade then.
Well, and so is Diane Keaton. She flips on a dime, too, because at the beginning of the film, the first scene we see with the two of them outside, he's being a jerk to her and everything. And then the next time we see the two of them, he's on her porch eating the food that she made for herself.
Oh, it's such good pasta.
And then all of a sudden she's like, oh, well, why don't you join me for a bowl? Like, what? You hated this guy the last scene.
There was literally a transition. It was like, how do you get away with being you? Oh, you want to have some pasta? Like
that's right.
Like it must just be reinforcing the idea that women just like, a-holes. It literally, in that scene, the transition made no sense. Like, she seemed insane. Yeah. The woman must have been insane.
Yes, she did. And she was.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't think any of us can really recommend it.
No.
Let's say that.
No. It's not very good.
With that in mind, let's move on to our home media moment, and that is A Birder's Guide to Everything. And Joe's going to tell us about that.
Apparently, I read an article, made a huge impact in the bird watching community. Like, people really loved this movie. So, bird watchers, you have a film now. I've heard there are other ones that aren't good, like
The Big Year.
The Big Year was not good.
When I was searching for the film, I actually came across that one too, and that one had scathing reviews. So I was kind of curious to see what the.
I give that a C, and I think that's pretty generous, actually. If you watch it,
I've heard worse.
Yeah,
apparently, I've heard nothing good according to the few websites I visited. But anyway, Birder's Guide to Everything is an independent film starring Cody Schmidt-McPhee, Alex Wolff, and even Sir Ben Kingsley, and was directed by Rob Meyer. McPhee stars the title character, a young boy who is still wrestling with his mother's death, as well as his father, soon to be remarried to the nurse, actually, that was nursing the mother before she died. To cope with these events, he engages in his true passion, birdwatching. After believing he may have discovered a nearly extinct duck, he enlists the help of his friends to go up into the mountains to find it. The best thing about this film is in the characters. These young actors give believable performances, and they are really having fun interacting, and you have fun watching them. The story provides a unique twist to the pursuit of a difficult goal. It also makes use of the natural area excellently with good camera work and editing. I do think this story has been done to death, and certainly better, but this film does have genuine heart, which prevents it from being too bogged down by indie cliches, and I give it a B.
Okay. Well, other than having a truly horrible title, one which will tempt nobody to check this movie out based on name alone.
This is true.
Birder's Guide is a decent little indie film. Other than adding the bird watching as a backdrop, though, it's not horribly original, like Joe mentioned, but everybody gives at least good performances, if not better. My biggest issue with the film, other than its originality problem, is that it's far too short for everything it's trying to tackle. Issues of parental death, a new parental romance, standard coming-of-age stuff, this passion for the birding. Another 20 minutes to flesh some of the characters and ideas out would have really benefited the film, especially because everything also wraps up far too neatly at the end. And like Joe, I also give it a B. Justin?
There are some certain things that seem almost imperative to any decent coming-of-age story. The protagonist needs to be likable, the scenario believable, and the payoff fitting without being preachy. It's not an easy balance to pull off, but while A Birder's Guide to Everything doesn't manage to do anything particularly mind-blowing with the narrative structure, it does mostly hit the mark. As the protagonist, Schmidt-McPhee shows audiences how easily he's making the transition to older roles, which is not something that goes for most child actors. Although some of the antics border on indie cliché at times, the dialogue helps establish the characters, and prove that writer and director Rob Meyer does honestly know what he's talking about. In slightly under an hour and a half, Meyer keeps his story tight, allowing development when appropriate, and knowing when to bring in side characters to keep things interesting. Unfortunately, the bulk of this is predictable, but the experience as a whole is by no means a struggle to get through. Although it's not perfect, A Birder's Guide to Everything does what it needs to do, albeit without straying too far from the familiar, and I give it a B-.
Did you feel that it was too short also, Justin? It could have used some more?
Just a little bit. I mean, like, you say 20 minutes or so, I'd be okay with like 10.
5 or 10.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. I just felt like there was a lot of things going on that none of them really got covered adequately. So I think if you devoted maybe a few minutes to each, maybe it would add up to like 10 to 12 minutes. I definitely wanted to see more Ben Kingsley, as I always do.
I feel like he was just kind of hanging out on the set.
Yeah,
like,
he was-
Hey, would you like me to be in the movie? We'll write a role
It
for
was
you.
like he just strolled by the set one day.
Well,
You're right.
It's one of those instances.
And he does
where
a decent job.
Well,
of course.
It's Ben Kingsley.
Did that need to be said?
I feel like it's just one of those instances where a film actually gets more buzz because an actor decides to give them a favor. Because really, if you look around, really, like the first docket is Ben Kingsley.
Right.
So if you go to Ben Kingsley performances, this might attract more viewers pretty much because of that.
Right.
I think otherwise, I mean, it really didn't get much reveal, and I think it was released in Tribeca, and then it was
Yes.
a while before it was released over here, so had a bit of a delay. I think that might have helped sell it. I really feel like it's one of those instances where
I would
they're like,
agree with that.
hey, Kingsley, how
I
you
was gonna
doing?
say that's what drew me to it originally.
Exactly. We're doing a little, drama. Want
Yeah.
give us a little cred.
Why not?
We're not going to watch a movie without you. Why, absolutely. I'm Ben Kingsley.
Why not?
So, I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I liked him.
I did as well, and I do think you're right. Without Ben Kingsley, because on name alone, like I said, I don't think anybody's going to check this movie out.
It's got a horrible title.
It's got a horrible title, and really, what is the everything in the title? We don't really.
Well,
I mean,
it's
he
supposed-
learned some things. I guess
It's, coming of age. It's like the whole life exploration with bird watching as the crux of it.
Right.
Through him as an outlet. But it is a bit misleading. You think it's going to be like a cool thing where they're going to investigate all the birds and then they're going to have some metaphor about like life experiences with each
Right.
bird. Like something cool like that, and maybe some stylistic thing with like the walking with dinosaurs. Here is this bird, and this is what it means. Da 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 da.
If only.
If only
we
right?
could wish.
No, I don't know, but it's something like that would have been a little cooler, maybe a little more quirky to kind of wean the bird watching more, because it
Right.
was interesting. I would have liked to see that just expanded on a little more. If I had to pick one area,
Well, especially like when they when the kids meet up with this group of not bullies, but older
people
who think they're the stuff because they've been birding for so long.
the ultimate birders.
Yeah. I could have used maybe a little more with them.
I did like the touches where they actually established why bird watching was so important for him because of the relationship with his mother. I thought that was
I liked that a lot.
Like those flashbacks were really cool because you do think to yourself, I mean, yes, people have hobbies, but why bird watching?
Right.
And I thought that was very clearly established. And I feel like that's one reason maybe this film didn't want to expand too much, because what it did well. They kind of wanted to leave you maybe with a little bit of an impression, or maybe just budgetary limits. I don't know.
Yeah, that
Maybe.
could be. I mean, I think it flew by though. I thought it was enjoyable enough.
Oh yeah, I mean,
certainly didn't get boring at all.
Would runtime have made it boring though? In all honesty,
I don't think so.
Another 10 minutes? No.
don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay.
All right, well, up next we're going to do our top 5, and this is in honor of And So It Goes. Now, originally, we were actually going to do the top 5 worst films starring senior citizens, but we decided to go with the positive, and we're going to do our favorites in that category. So we sort of set the cutoff at a general, like, age 60 and up, sort of like we did a few weeks back when Earth to Echo came out and we did the top 5 kids movies. We want to have, multiple people in this age range be starring in the film. So, Joe, why don't we start with you and the top 5 best films starring the older generation?
Whenever we say best, it always makes it sound too official. These are my favorites, Dan.
Yeah, sure. That's more. You're right.
These are our favorites. Maybe the best
true.
list, but like I don't want
That's
to.
true.
The order of some of these things might confuse some
You're
people.
right. I don't usually say best. I guess because we changed it from worst, I wrote best on the paper.
Let's put it this way. Let clearly establish this. When we're doing lists, we'll say best. If we're trying to take personal feelings out of it, we'll try to do that sometime.
Okay.
Because that might make a more interesting list.
Yeah.
But let's face it, personal stuff is interesting. I'll just say, it's all about the wording, right? And now, my number 5 is one that Justin and I actually talked about recently, and that's Secondhand Lions. I mean, this is just a really fun and underrated family film. And, obviously Robert Duvall, Michael Caine, 2 great ones right there. It's funny, but it's also incredibly heartfelt. It's a good story. Dan, have you ever seen it?
I have not.
I think you'd like it.
I own it.
I think, well...
It was in the $5 bin at Walmart, and I bought it because it might have been from you talking about it, actually.
Really?
That I thought, I should check this out.
It's just one of those things that I remember growing up. It was one that you could put on, and it's just a really nice movie. That's the best way to describe it. But yeah, that's a good one. Number 4 is a classic. Gotta have it on the list, and that's Grumpy Old Men. I mean, this movie is hilarious. It's so funny, and I mean, okay, it's a little ridiculous at points, but that is the point. And it's kind of a classic story that a lot of worse films, like the one we just watched, kind of base things on. And it's probably one of the best ones to make it work, honestly. Number 3 is actually kind of in the vein also, and stars Keaton, and that's Something's Gotta Give. That's a film that I've always found to be very funny and enjoyable, and it's actually one of the better romantic comedies that I've seen featuring older people. And it's probably one of Jack Nicholson's
I was going to say her and Nicholson, right?
Yeah, and maybe it's just Nicholson that held it up for me. But once again, despicable character, but kind of going through his own evolution. Number 2 is also a Nicholson movie, and it's one we've watched not too long ago, and that's about Schmidt. I mean, it's a great film about the whole, aging sequence, getting older and dealing with it, looking back and reflecting on your life. It's quite excellent. I've talked about it before, so I'll just leave you in suspense for my number 1.
Awesome. I thought about Schmidt. I didn't end up putting it on because really Nicholson is the only star over 60. Kathy Bates is real close. I think she's like mid-50s in the movie. But that's why it isn't on mine, but it definitely would be.
Technically, you could include his wife and his best friend, who were definitely older.
Well, that's true, I guess. That's true. I wasn't thinking of them as, like,
major,
quote-unquote, starring characters, but you're right. I mean, they definitely factor into his journey. Justin, let's go to you.
All right. Well, Joe, I want you to know that I'm officially kicking myself. I should have totally thought about Secondhand Lions.
That's cool.
So, for the sake of keeping everything as is, I'm going to leave that as my honorable mention. But to kick mine off is one that we've talked about in Season 2, and that is Cold in July. I thought this was a really good suspense thriller using younger actor Dexter's Michael C. Hall with Sam Shepard and Don Johnson. I thought they worked very well together, both sort of acting as a sort of agitator and instigator. And honestly, despite some tonal issues that you and I sort of addressed, I thought it was a overall pretty well done movie.
Oh, yeah, it's a good movie.
My number 4 is one that I know that you saw for last year, Dan, and that is Amour. I really like the dynamic between the two characters. They're interesting, and yet they have a very both jaded and honest look at the end of a relationship in old age. The only reason this is so low on my list was when I watched it, and I'm very curious to see how this will impact me on a second viewing. I thought once Emmanuel Riva, who was not obviously nominated for Best Actress, when her character started fading, I felt like the movie kind of lost a little bit of steam. But like I said, I'm very curious to see how that'll impact on when we finally get to it on Oscars.
Yeah, it won't be too much longer.
Number 3 is Amistad, going back all the way to Season 1. Morgan Freeman and Anthony Hopkins are absolutely fantastic actors, and this is quite possibly their most underrated performances. I think the speech Anthony Hopkins gives at the end is fantastic, hence deserving of being on my top 5 presidential portrayals.
Is it really underrated? I thought people generally thought Amistad was great.
I've never really heard anybody talk that much about Amistad other than like, oh yeah, Spielberg made this. And you, yes, Joe.
I mean, I know it's regarded as a very well-made film. It's not like, I mean, you're right, people don't rave about it, but I mean, it's a good choice for your list. Yeah. I just think it's...
Unlike Amour, we'll be watching that coming up very soon on the Oscar A to Z as well.
That we will. And my number 2, which would not have been on this list had Dan not approved it, and that is All Is Lost. Redford does a fantastic job relying almost entirely on body language. I'm kind of disregarding the whole opening monologue where it's just him giving a brief thing via voiceover about his situation. I thought he really highlighted his scenario. I thought it really showed how much range he has for how old he is. And the man's still going. So I was blown away by it. I think J.C. Chandor is probably one of the most promising directors in the biz right now. And I really am looking forward to seeing where he heads next. I think less is more, and this is a textbook example of that.
All right. Well, I'll give an honorable mention as well. And that is Batteries Not Included. Oh. It's a movie I haven't seen since I was a kid, so it's hard for me to say how much it holds up, but I did enjoy it when I saw it in the late 80s. Number 5 is a good romantic comedy, and that's It's Complicated. Alec Baldwin was not quite in the age range, but Steve Martin and Meryl Streep certainly were. And it's a funny movie for certainly the older crowd, about the older crowd. And my number 4 is, like Justin on his list, is All Is Lost. Robert Redford gives an absolutely fantastic performance. Unfortunately, we won't be watching that one for the Oscar A to Z because the cutoff is last year, or 2 years ago, I should say. But maybe we'll watch it and review it again for a new classic at some point. Joe has yet to see it, so
I haven't.
Maybe we'll do that. My number 3 is Away From Her. I put this in an earlier top 5 or top 10 actually that week for the debut feature films for directors, and this was Sarah Polley's. And it's just a fantastic story. It's heart-wrenching. There's another letter A movie that we'll be watching for the Oscar A to Z before too long, so I don't need to say too much about that now. My number 2 is Grumpy Old Men. Classic. You really cannot go wrong with Walter Matthau, or Jack Lemmon for that matter. Both fantastic, and it really goes to show that if you're funny, you're always funny. These guys were in their late 70s probably when they made this film, and it holds up next to any romantic comedy starring younger actors. So that's my number 2. Joe?
Well,
I know you're number 1.
Well, first, let me just officially say I have a couple honorable mentions because
Sure.
there actually are a lot of good movies with older people I think you should know. Driving Miss Daisy is a classic. Also, one of my personal favorites is Oh God, actually, with George Burns.
Sure.
If there is a movie, and I will say this, and I might be one of the few, Morgan Freeman might be God, but George Burns has always been my God because he was amazing in that movie. I love
Fair
that movie.
enough.
So those are some honorable mentions for you. Well, what's my number 1?
Cocoon.
Cocoon. Yes. If there is a movie starring old people about old people that's a lot of fun, it's a really genuinely good story and actually kind of heartfelt. I mean, there are some tragic moments too, despite the fun. It's an 80s classic. I think people remember it, but I don't know. It comes up once in a while in conversation. If you haven't seen it, it really is a good movie. The sci-fi elements are light. It's really more of a fantasy, and it's genuinely good. Everybody gives us a good job in the movie, and of course, Wilford Brimley, and
classic Wilford Brimley,
starring main role. So
great, Ron Howard directing as well.
Once again,
Yep.
Yeah, Justin, you and I have not seen that one. We'll have to.
I'll have to run it sometime.
Yeah, definitely. And if not, then in a couple years at least it'll be up for Oscar A to Z. All right, Justin, what's your number 1?
My number 1 is Pixar's Up. There are many films that try to pull off the whole live life to the fullest message, none of which I think have done it even remotely as close with as much heart and passion as Up has. Ed Asner, Christopher Plummer as both the protagonist and antagonist, absolutely perfect. The interplay is great. The heart is great. The first 10 minutes are unquestionably the most heartbreaking I've seen in at least the past 5 years. It's a phenomenal movie, and it really brings back what I wish Hollywood would do more, and that's stop making kids movies and make family films.
Up is a great movie. If I had counted that for the list, it would be number 1 on just about any top 5 that it would count for. I didn't count it just because it's mainly a story between the old man and the boy, but I see where you're coming from. Christopher Plummer has a decent-sized role in it.
Yeah.
So my number 1 ends up being Amour. I don't need to say too much about it. We're going to do it within the next month or two here on the Oscar A to Z, and I've talked about it when we did the French directors as well just a few weeks ago. So I don't need to go too much detail, but it is a fantastic movie. Joe, I can't wait for you to see it and get your impressions in a few weeks on that. All right, well, that wraps it up for the top 5, so let's move into the final portion of our show, and that is the triple feature of older films. And before we start on this, I want to put the call out for this month's Listener's Choice Old Classic. If you do have an idea for a movie you'd like us to review for an old classic, the only criteria is that it must be more than 2 years old. And you can let us know that at the YouTube channel here in the comment section, or let us know on Film Fanatics with an exclamation point on Facebook. That's our group there. Or if you know us personally, you can just put a bug in our ear about it, and we will add it to the list. So that will be coming up in just a few weeks. Up first is our new classic, though, and that is Sleepwalk With Me. Joe's going to tell us about it.
All right, well, Sleepwalk With Me is an independent comedy film starring, written, and directed by comedian MIKE Birbiglia. It is based on the real-life events of the comedian, following a story about a struggling comedian who refuses to face facts regarding his feelings towards his fiancée and his sleepwalking disorder. As the situation builds, it leads to both funny and even dangerous consequences. This film is rather quirky, but manages to work mostly for being an honest film and generally down to earth. The humor reflected by the film is at its best when Mark is being honest, even in awkward circumstances. It also has a good story about self-discovery and overcoming adversity. Plus, the focus on this disorder gives the movie a very unique edge, as this particular type of issue isn't really discussed that much in film, or really in general, at least in my experience. The movie does seem a bit short, and it does leave some points a little underdeveloped. Still, it's a very enjoyable watch, and I give it an A-.
Nice. Yeah, we ran this movie this week since it bears a little resemblance to last month's Obvious Child, and that it revolves a stand-up comedian dealing with their life on and off the stage and intertwining the two. Sleepwalk, however, is a much more authentic take in that, like Joe mentioned, it's basically a biopic for star Birbiglia, who also wrote and directed the film. It's based on his book and one-man show of the same name, so Birbiglia is obviously not shy about his odd and sometimes embarrassing condition, and finds the humor in it. Now, I'm a fan of his comedy anyway. He's a frequent guest on a daily podcast that I listen to, but this is the first I've seen of his actual stand-up. He's hilarious and clever, but most of all, he is real. And his directing, while fairly basic, gets the job done, and I like the fourth wall narration as scene transitions as opposed to voiceovers. It is far too short, as by the time the audience is fully engaged in the story, it abruptly ends. And I also feel that his comedic delivery is a specific type, both on stage and in his storytelling in the film. So if somebody isn't into his style, I doubt they'll really appreciate Sleepwalk, but for me, like Joe, it is an A-.
I do have to agree. I think the humor might be very divisive
It's a bit
for some
polarizing,
people.
I think.
Like, some people wouldn't be into that at all.
Yeah.
As we saw in the film, actually.
That's true, yeah. Because not only is he really honest about it, but just his
It's kind of
style of getting it across.
delivery. It's like, it might not... It's almost like a lot of it was funny. Like, we were laughing. But the
Right.
people in the audience of the film weren't laughing because it's almost like he was going for... This isn't really funny. It's kind of funny to see me fail.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you just kind of hear me talk and you get charmed by him.
Yeah.
But that might not work for everybody.
And some of the scenes in the movie, they're humor-laden, but, like, for example, his condition is so bad that at one point he jumps out a second-story hotel window, which is not necessarily played completely for laughs,
No.
but it has humorous elements to it, as you're watching it. I don't know if...
But once again, it's literally like some comedians will literally just state facts.
Right.
And you might find that funny, you might not.
It's definitely part of the presentation. I don't know if everybody's going to find
Yeah.
jumping out of second-story window funny.
Yeah, not everybody might like all the jokes. But,
Right.
But go ahead, Justin.
Justin, let's go to you.
It takes a great deal of courage to make fun of oneself, but even more to devote an entire film to it. In Sleepwalk With Me, which is based on Birbiglia's own personal struggles, he puts it all on center stage and doesn't hold back. Though ironically, what ends up serving as the best components to the film are not necessarily the quirky sleepwalking scenarios, but rather following Birbiglia's character as he struggles to put a stand-up comedy routine together and winning audiences over. He doesn't always paint himself in the best light, but like Dan said, it's honest and puts on display how much comedians really do borrow from life experiences. Unfortunately, as I think all three of us have mentioned, the film does come and go rather quickly, but Sleepwalk With Me makes use of every second at its disposal within that time, and I also give it an A-.
Well, and I think to speak to that point, Justin, I think most of the greatest stand-up comedians of all time draw from their own life experience. Bill Cosby, Richard Pryor, Jerry Seinfeld, I mean, Roseanne.
Yeah.
These are people who have taken everything about their own lives and really put it out on the stage.
George Carlin.
And George Carlin, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
There's another one. So I think it's easy to see why a movie like this would appeal to stand-up comedy fans, even if you don't know who Mike Birbiglia is. I mean, I don't know if you guys...
I never heard
of
of him
the movie,
before.
no.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is something he's been open about for years and years. I don't know when exactly the book came out, but it was a few years ago. And, the way he sort of is able to poke fun at himself while admitting, like, no, this is, like, actually a serious problem.
It's very applaudable.
It really is.
And I like the fact that the way the film ended, like how he kind of overcame that issue, it's kind of funny, but it's also uplifting.
Right.
Like, 'cause it's a serious thing, but you manage to turn it into humor, which is often what comedy is.
It is. And, not often an easy thing to do. Like, as a recent example, the Michael J. Fox comeback show they had on NBC this year, his Parkinson's was part of his story in the character, and it just wasn't funny. Because you felt so bad for him.
So you felt like you were making fun of him if you laughed.
Exactly. And so it's a fine line to walk. And, some people can do it better than others, obviously. I mean, Michael J. Fox isn't a stand-up comedian, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah, with Birbiglia, he's just, here it is. And we saw some of that in the character with Obvious Child.
Yes.
Obviously, that was Jenny Slate portraying a character.
But I think that was basically her.
Yeah, I mean, she is a stand-up, and I haven't seen any of her stand-up stuff, but
I'd imagine
she's always pretty open in interviews and things like that, so I would imagine she probably does draw from her own experiences.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to our old classic, and that was my pick for this week, and that is The Birdcage. It's a 1996 comedy based on the 70s Italian film and later stage show La Cage aux Folles. It's directed by Mike Nichols, one of the very few living people with an EGOT, people with an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and a Tony.
Yeah.
The film stars Robin Williams and Nathan Lane as Armand and Albert Goldman, a couple who live above a drag club in South Beach known as the Birdcage. Armand owns the club, and Albert is the star of the show. When Armand's son from a surrogate, Val, played by Dan Futterman, comes and says he's marrying the daughter of an ultra-conservative senator from Ohio, and that they want to meet Val's parents, as in a mother and a straight father, it throws everything into upheaval. Gene Hackman and Diane Wiest play the Ohio couple, and Callista Flockhart plays Val's fiancée, Barbara. Hank Azaria co-stars as Agador, the Goldmans' very flamboyant housekeeper. The Birdcage is one of the greatest film farces of our time. The two leads play wonderfully off each other, whether it's Williams trying to teach Lane how to act more straight, or Lane making everybody uncomfortable in a fabulous reveal during the second half of the film. It's so fantastically over the top, but it really works. It rarely comes off as offensive because both sides are such ridiculous stereotypes, it just all fits together. Hackman shows a comedic side that we rarely had seen before that, but has never been stronger. I will admit, as one of our friends that watched it with us pointed out, Lane's character might be a little too much at certain times, not meaning his flamboyancy necessarily, but more his martyrdom. But The Birdcage is a fabulous movie that, honestly, I don't think is quoted enough. People talk about how they like it, but there's a lot of really good lines in this film.
I've quoted it before.
And I give it an A-.
Oh, nice.
Justin?
The original film was a groundbreaking comedy, and it's one of the few times a remake can largely hold its own with the source material. While the premise already lends itself to quirky fun almost immediately, the film also dares to pose deeper questions about what qualities does society take into consideration when deciding what's predominantly heterosexual or homosexual, or to put it in more stereotypical terms, masculine or feminine. At times, it's a bit over the top and kind of ridiculous, but there's no denying that the film has a point that's sharp as a razor when it wants to hit it home. Williams and Lane are absolutely brilliant as a couple and offer up a couple legitimate moments of drama whenever appropriate without compromising the tone. Although they sometimes overshadow the storyline of their son, played by Futterman, struggling to get approval from both sides, the two are just so much fun that it can be at least partially overlooked. The Birdcage is a comedy classic that really serves as a testament to how much homosexuality in United States culture has changed over the years, and I give it an A-.
Joe, what'd you think of The Birdcage?
I had seen bits and pieces of this one, but this is the first time I actually got to see the whole movie.
Oh, nice.
And I really think it lives up to the classic nature of it. I mean, there are some great performances here. I think it's one of the best Robin Williams comedic ones. I actually am kind of in the camp I generally prefer his dramatic performances. So this is probably one of the better comedic ones I've seen. And Nathan Lane's one of my favorites. I feel like he doesn't pop up as much. You see him sporadically. Like when he's there, he just steals the show. But he picks his projects very carefully. I think they were just great. I think Justin pointed out they portray these great characters having this really complicated relationship. And I mean, I will admit I think that the film does take a little while to get going. But it does get more interesting as it goes along and builds momentum. And it keeps the characters from being too stereotypical while still being over the top somehow. Mm-hmm. And Nathan Lane specifically is actually kind of a smart commentary on the aspects of society, not just on homosexuality, but there's just witty writing and great chemistry between the actors to really meld everything together. I did feel, though, that it kind of could border on being offensive. I know that by the end of the film it's kind of resolved, but Nathan Lane's character did seem so over the top. I was like, is this somebody's actual interpretation? Like, you could tell the film is not trying to negatively portray homosexual people, but I feel like it could have easily been taken that way. Mm-hmm. So I'm not entirely sure if that was the best way to handle that, and I did think his character could be annoying at points. But really, overall, it was a well-done film. I think especially that final scene where the dinner commences is hilarious.
It's fantastic.
That's probably like one of the best farces ever. It was fantastic, and I also give it an A-.
Nice. Yeah, I think, and sort of like I mentioned in my review, I think the thing that makes it not offensive, at least on the whole, is that both sides are just so ridiculously over the top. Like, we learn fairly early on when we first meet Gene Hackman's character that one of his, I don't know if it was a fellow senator or who it was, but died being caught in a bed with an underage prostitute who was black, and her race was the biggest problem he had with it.
Yeah.
So it's like, it sort of blows up stereotypes on both sides. And I think that really sort of helps get that message across in an inoffensive way. I mean, at least from my perspective.
I do feel like...
I think it's a fair assessment.
It was mostly saved. I just feel like it went up and clearly established immediately. Like, I do feel like someone could take offense from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think... I mean, listen, you can take offense to anything, I suppose.
Well, I'll be honest. I wasn't sure how to feel about it in the beginning, because I thought it was actually being stereotypical in a mocking sense. So, because this isn't like a recent film. This was in the 90s. Mid-90s. So, I mean, at this point, it wasn't really that obvious to see films displaying homosexuality this, up front openly. Yeah. So... And I wasn't completely sure how to feel about it in the beginning.
I think I can definitely see that.
So I was like, I wasn't sure. Like, I mean, I understand the intent, but I wanted it to have to be quite as over the top all the time.
Okay.
I don't know.
I think it sort of falls into the same category as Will and Grace does. I don't know how much you've seen of that.
I watched a bit of it.
But, I mean, obviously, at the core, Will and his best friend Jack are two gay men, and Jack is the, way over the top flamboyant one. Will is sort of, the quote-unquote straight man, the masculine one of the two. And, it sort of always had played off of those conventions, but at the same time, I mean, they definitely say some things that could be construed as offensive.
I just think it's a fine line to walk.
It is.
I think it's dangerous to say anybody's a stereotype. We so obviously go, even whether it's race or religion, we easily go to stereotypes in a lot of our films, and oftentimes it's kind of overlooked. Yeah. Even in award-winning films.
That's very true.
The Magic Negro theory is still in effect, for instance. It was a way to kind of respect elderly black figures by having this old, wise black figure come out and explain everything, advise people. It's supposed to be something that's not racist, but it kind of is. Right. By always going back to the trope. And, I mean, that's just an example.
I can see that.
But it's something we usually say, we have here a character who is really over the top and very flamboyantly gay, and there might be people like that, but if every character is like that to accentuate that they're gay and they can't just be not obviously so gay, then that's a bad thing. It just makes it easier to associate. I think that it's dangerous to walk that line. I think that overall the Birdcage did succeed in doing it well. Yeah. Because of the ending.
Right, I agree.
Because if it had kept on going with Nathan Lane just continuously acting like a prima donna,
right.
I mean, he just would have been a bad character.
Right.
Yeah. So it definitely was something that stuck in my mind too.
Well, and I also think that it really does help, not to say that actors should only do their thing, but it also helps that Nathan Lane is an openly gay man, and so here you have the gay man playing the very stereotypically over-the-top gay character.
That does help.
I think it helps it a little bit, as well.
To be fair, I mean, Robin Williams also counteracting that, didn't act overtly stereotypically gay.
Well, right, and the Will and Grace thing that I mentioned,
goes into effect. So I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't there. I just feel like people tend to drift to what's more obvious.
Right. That's true. Well, and of course, then you have a Hank Azaria's character as well.
He might have been worse, honestly. I will be honest. I wasn't. I thought he was funny. Yeah. But I felt bad sometimes. I just don't know. So he seemed cartoony, and I know it's Hank Azaria. Yeah. But I'm just
But that is kind of Azaria.
I don't know. He was the one point where I'm just I don't think you're completely necessary.
Right. Well, I'll be honest. I was a little bit shocked in reading up on the film for the show that GLAAD, the main gay rights group, was super behind this movie.
Really?
And yeah, I was a little surprised by that, I will admit, because it does sort of walk that line where it could be perceived as maybe going a little too far.
It does, but I mean, think about all the movies nowadays where they're trying to do essentially what the Birdcage did, and they completely miss the mark. Cuban Fury, to some extent.
Yeah.
I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry.
Oh, God.
Just don't even talk about that movie.
Well,
It's
we'll leave
so
it at
terrible.
that, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, do I ever with that movie. Well, and we talked about this on the show, again, to mention Obvious Child, about a month ago, but the gay character in that was like, you knew he was gay, but he wasn't over the top about it.
He wasn't overtly gay, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
But you still knew.
You still knew.
You know?
Like,
Yeah.
he displayed aspects that you could say maybe more feminine.
Sure.
But then again, there
Well,
are
and of
people
course,
that can be straight that
in
could...
his on-stage performance, he talked about guys.
Yeah.
You know, so
I mean,
it's like...
even if you didn't get that, he could have
Right.
seemed completely macho and still be gay. I mean,
Right.
it's Sopranos.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, there you go.
Definitely a classic. I really liked it. I'd like to watch it again sometime.
Yeah, that's a perennial for me. I'll watch that like every year or two.
And hey,
pop it in.
it also kind of made me want to watch Ally McBeal again.
Listen,
was
one
just-
of my favorites. I
was
love Ally
surprised.
McBeal.
She was great.
Yeah, it was weird to see her playing a 17-year-old though, because she was probably about
At least
25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, this is actually harking back to an old review. One reason I did like the Birders Guide to Everything, the kids were actually about
They're
the
kids,
age
I know.
that portraying instead of being like 25-year-olds playing 15-year-olds.
Yes, I hate that.
I did like the fact they were actually teenage actors. So.
Yeah, we've had a few of those good ones recently.
I like that.
The Kings of Summer last year was like that, and the way back they were actually kids, and
I hate that.
yeah, it's a little much.
So annoying.
All right, well, our final film for the show is our Oscar A to Z, and this week that's An American in Paris. This is a 1951 film that got 8 nominations, and it won 6 of them, including Best Picture, Best Writing, and 4 Artistic Awards, Art, Cinematography, Costume Design, and Musical Score, and it was also nominated for Best Director and Editing. Gene Kelly also received an honorary award that year, his only Oscar ever, for, here's what they said, quote, his versatility as an actor, singer, director, and dancer, and specifically for his brilliant achievements in the art of choreography. So,
Wow.
that's his one and only Oscar. But, all right, Justin's going to tell us about An American in Paris.
Jerry Mulligan, played by Gene Kelly, is a World War II veteran who decides to live in Paris after the war, struggling alongside his friend and neighbor Adam Cook, played by Oscar Levant, a concert pianist, and his associate, the singer Henri Borel, played by Georges Guéteret. However, while he attends his art show by an admirer named Milo, played by Nina Fouche, Jerry sees and falls for a beautiful woman named Lise, played by Leslie Caron, unaware that she's dating Henri, and a love triangle ensues. In this day and age, it's all too easy to dismiss An American in Paris, since so many of its plot devices and other narrative elements have been used over and over again. But in actuality, that's what makes it so iconic. Although the story has influenced many genres, from romantic comedies to soap operas to even other hybrids like This Means War, it really comes to life mostly well within the Paris setting. The editing and cinematography in this film is absolutely brilliant and stunning, truly using color as well as a couple clever quick cuts to draw intrigue and excitement during some of the more visceral dance numbers. This sadly is where I start to have some more noticeable issues. While the first 2 acts balance story and song and dance spectacle with ease, the finale gets bogged down tremendously with increasingly over-the-top numbers. At first, these are absolutely beautiful to look at, and offer up imagery that has stayed with me well after we were done watching. But once it starts running on for 15 or even 20 minutes, I found myself wanting to get back into the story. Granted, I understand paying respects to the 1928 orchestral composition that the film drew inspiration from, but eventually it starts coming off like a live-action version of Fantasia, while still trying to hold on to its musical roots. This probably wouldn't have been so noticeable had the film added more story following that, but instead decides to simply stop there. It's not a bad conclusion, and it fits, but I feel like it just needed more time to wrap things up and a little less spectacle to reach that point. That said, An American in Paris is still a timeless musical that has brought forth an endless array of inspiration for years to follow, regardless of said flaws, and I give it a B+.
Well, I love that you talked about This Means War in your review. Classic Reese Witherspoon. Yeah, listen, the stalwart of early Technicolor musicals is Gene Kelly, and we're going to see him again in mere weeks in the A to Z with Anchors Away. He gives another charismatic performance here and has all of the film's most memorable moments and songs. The visuals are outstanding, so it's easy to see why it won so many of the artistic awards at the Oscars, but it's nothing compared to the choreography of the song numbers. Now, Kelly would make his masterpiece with his next film, Singin' in the Rain, and An American in Paris does have a way over-bloated, long-form number towards the end of the film, like that one does, like Justin mentioned. But for this one, it acts as basically the entire finale of the film, and then it's all over. So for those that don't like getting their story exposition entirely from song and dance performances, I'm not sure how it will work for them. The story in general here is much more standard than Singin' in the Rains as well, but it's hard to deny those dancing shoes of Kelly's, and I give it a B+ as well. Joe?
You'll find some echoing here. This film is incredibly well shot. I mean, I just loved the cinematography here. The editing was beautiful. Just they utilized Technicolor so well. Mm-hmm. I think it's on the same level of Robin Hood, actually, because just some of the contrasting dresses with the costumes, it was just beautiful. I mean, really, the dance numbers were great. They do kind of act as the greatest strength and weakness of the film, ironically. The performances were really good. I did like these characters. I thought we knew them well enough to be somewhat intrigued by their story. The big problem here for me was that the plot is just okay. Like, it comes nowhere near close to matching the spectacle of what they're trying to do. And the song numbers, though good, do have a tendency to run on a bit long, especially towards the end, where by the end I honestly lost the plot. I mean, maybe it gets a little more artistic and abstract, but I don't think that's necessarily the way to go when you really want to get at least some kind of firm resolution. It was still cool to look at, but it did kind of get boring towards the end there. Still, once again, the cinematography, costumes, and music were all an amazing experience, and I also give it a B+.
Nice. And a great cameo.
From Lois Lane.
From Lois Lane herself, Noelle Neal from the Superman serial that we watched.
Pretty awesome. We knew that by voice, because we didn't even really see, like, the front of her head. We saw the back. And
you recognized that voice right away.
I was just
like, I think that's Lois Lane.
Like, is that Lois Lane? Like, that was great. Must have been an early, like, first bit part for her.
Pretty much, yeah.
Another bad hat.
She wasn't another bad hat.
Though nowhere near as hideous.
No.
It was like a standard cap as opposed to the big sailor thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was.
That was terrible. But, bad. I mean, I would say that the best number of the whole movie is probably the one he does in the, maybe not quite the middle of the movie with the kids.
Mm-hmm. Oh, with the tap dancing.
Oh, my gosh. Was that ever good?
That was amazing.
It was amazing. And, the choreography was great. The song was great. His tap dancing, obviously phenomenal. I'm looking forward to seeing more of these as we go on, because a lot of these early MGM musicals were nominated for Oscars. So we'll get to see a lot of them. And like I mentioned, in just a few weeks we'll be watching Anchors Away, which was a bit before this, a few years before this. So it'll be interesting to see sort of the transition,
I'm guessing
from year to year.
Navy film?
It is a Navy film, and he dances with Jerry the Mouse from Tom and Jerry in it. That's it's what it's known for.
Oh, okay.
So
that's cool.
Very excited to see that.
That's cool.
But yeah, this was definitely a good one. I don't know that it's something I need to watch again. Like Singin' in the Rain, I've now seen a couple of times, and I really enjoy it.
But it's still an important film to watch for.
Yeah, I think anybody that's certainly into either our early Hollywood or Hollywood musicals or, should definitely check it out.
There's someone that could really love this movie.
Absolutely.
If you're really a music aficionado, especially for those older musicals in the vein of Roger and Hammerstein and whatnot, it's definitely up there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say definitely check it out. I mean, I could watch it again. I would like to try and give that last sequence another shot.
Yeah.
Just to see if I could get more absorbed into it. Maybe I could appreciate it a little more. But you're right, it's not something I'm really eager to watch anytime near soon.
Right. All right, well, good. We all liked it, though.
Yeah, it was good.
And that will wrap it up for the show this week. Now, you guys, I know, are about to embark on your controversial movies shows.
And we're going to be leading with The Last Temptation of Christ. But
okay.
Because we're going to be waiting on Aladdin. There's a little bit of a delay there.
I see.
But if anybody has any suggestions, please, they're always welcome.
Yeah. And you guys are going to do that on your channel, the Merlin channel.
That's true.
Correct.
We will. And I also uploaded a review of the new Storm comic, the first issue.
Nice.
It's pretty good. I recommend checking it out. You don't have to watch the video if you want to. Just if you like Storm, check it out. And we also did a Guardians of the Galaxy review with the whole group.
Oh, nice.
I think there were a bunch of people, like 9 there, so it was the biggest group so
far. Yeah, you
far.
had a big group there.
So yeah, a lot of people, and it was a fun time. You'll find they all had pretty similar grades.
No, very good. Very good.
Yep.
And your first A+ for the year, let's remind everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I wrestle with it, but I'm like, you know what? It just feels right.
Listen.
It works for me.
I mean, A- for me and Justin, but I think it's completely fair. It's certainly a great movie. And, it's a year shy of some great movies.
If it makes you feel any better, to consider the A+, I compared it to Chef. And for me, Chef, I was like, I really like Chef.
Yeah.
But I liked this more. Okay. So it's an A+.
Yeah.
I'm not going to fight you on it.
Chef was my A+.
Yeah.
And still waiting for one from Justin. Hopefully soon.
Hopefully. We got Boyhood in 2 weeks.
Step up all in. I think is going to probably do it for you.
Actually, I think I might have another, though. I think September, October.
Oh, okay. Very good. All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for the show. If you have not subscribed yet to our channel, go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear from you. And the Twitter feed is at the Film Fanatics Pod. And like I mentioned earlier, the Facebook group where we post our 5-word reviews weekly is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And we'll see you back here next week. Hail Hydra!